I never thought losing my job would be the least painful thing to happen to me that day. It started like any other morning, rushing through traffic, balancing a coffee in one hand and my phone in the other, answering emails before I even reached the office. I had worked at Blackwood Enterprises for 5 years, pouring everything I had into this job. Long nights, endless projects, and sacrifices that most people wouldn't understand. I wasn't just another employee, I was the backbone of my department. Or at least, that's what I believed. The rumors had been circling for weeks. The CEO, Alexander Blackwood, was making changes. People were getting fired left and right. Departments were being restructured. I tried to convince myself I was safe. After all, I was irreplaceable. Everyone knew that, but I wasn't. That morning, I was called into the CEO's office. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. I had seen Alexander Blackwood before, but only in meetings where he barely acknowledged my existence. He was a man of power, tall, sharp-eyed, and intimidating. He built this company from the ground up, turning it into a corporate empire. He was ruthless, cold, and calculated. I sat across from him, forcing a confident smile. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice emotionless. "I'll be direct, we're letting you go." My stomach dropped. Letting me go? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. He continued, as if reading from a script. "You've done excellent work here, but this company needs people who can be replaced. If one person holds too much power in a department, it creates dependency. I need a system that runs smoothly without relying on individuals." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I blinked, trying to process his words. "So, you're firing me because I'm too good at my job?" My voice shook with disbelief. "Because you're irreplaceable," he corrected, leaning back in his chair. "And in my company, no one should be irreplaceable." The words felt like a slap. I had given everything to this company, and this was my reward? I clenched my fists under the table, trying to hold back tears, but I refused to let him see me break. I stood up, my legs shaking beneath me. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Blackwood," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. He barely nodded. The meeting was over. I walked out of his office, my whole world crumbling around me. But what I didn't know then, what I couldn't have known, was that this wasn't just the end of my career. This was the beginning of a truth that would shatter both of our lives. I walked out of the office with my heart pounding in my chest. Everything felt surreal, like I was in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The whispers started the moment I stepped into the hallway. My coworkers avoided my gaze, some looking guilty, others relieved that they weren't the ones being fired today. I wanted to scream. Instead, I kept walking, past the desks where I had spent years working late nights, past the break room where I had laughed with coworkers who now wouldn't even meet my eyes, past the framed awards on the wall, some of which bore my name. None of it mattered anymore. By the time I reached my office, my hands were trembling. I grabbed a box from under my desk and started packing. My mind was spinning. What was I supposed to do now? As I shoved my belongings into the box, my fingers brushed against something, an old, creased photograph wedged between some papers. I hadn't seen it in years. I picked it up carefully, my breath catching in my throat. It was a picture of me as a little girl, no older than 4, sitting on my mother's lap. My mother's warm smile, her kind eyes, she looked so young, so full of life. I could almost hear her laughter. But it wasn't just us in the photo. Beside my mother was a young boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old. He had dark, serious eyes and neatly combed brown hair. He sat close to her, his small hand resting on her arm like he never wanted to let go. I knew this picture well. My mother had always told me about him, the brother I never got to grow up with. His name was Alex. I stared at the photo, my mind struggling to connect the pieces. Alex. My mother had told me he was taken from us when I was just a baby. She had searched for him for years, but we never found him. Alex. I felt my breath hitch. Alexander Blackwood. No, it couldn't be. I gripped the photograph so tightly, my knuckles turned white. My chest felt like it was caving in. The man who had just fired me, the man who barely looked at me as he destroyed my career. Was he the brother I had lost? The room spun. My pulse pounded in my ears. I needed answers, and I knew exactly where to get them. I stormed out of my office, the photograph clutched in my shaking hand. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one more impossible than the last. Could Alexander Blackwood really be my long-lost brother? It didn't make sense. But the boy in the picture, his sharp eyes, his serious expression, it was him. I had to know the truth. Before I could second-guess myself, I marched straight back to the CEO's office. His assistant looked startled as I approached. "Miss Carter, I don't think." But I didn't stop. I pushed the door open without knocking. Alexander sat behind his massive mahogany desk, reviewing some paperwork. His cold, professional mask was still in place, but when he saw me, his eyes narrowed. "Miss Carter, I don't recall inviting you back." I slammed the photograph down on his desk. His gaze flickered to it. I saw the confusion in his eyes, followed by something else, something that looked suspiciously like recognition. "Where did you get this?" His voice was sharper now. My heart pounded. "It belonged to my mother." He stiffened. The air between us became unbearably heavy. I swallowed hard. "She told me I had a brother. He was taken from us when I was a baby. His name was Alex." I met his gaze, searching for any sign of denial, any indication that I was wrong. "You're him, aren't you?" For a moment he just stared at me. Then, slowly he exhaled and leaned back in his chair. His usual confident posture faltered. He looked shaken. "I don't remember much about my real family," he admitted, his voice quieter now. "I was adopted when I was 7. My new parents told me my past didn't matter." He let out a bitter laugh. I believed them. My throat tightened. "Our mother never stopped looking for you." His jaw clenched, but he didn't say anything. I took a deep breath, my emotions threatening to spill over. "You fired me today because you thought no one should be irreplaceable." I shook my head. "But Alex, you were never replaceable to her. You were her son, and you were my brother." He looked away, his hands curled into fists on the desk. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the years of buried pain, the cracks forming in his carefully built walls. "Why didn't she find me?" he whispered, almost to himself. "She tried," I said, my voice breaking. "But they changed your last name. They made sure she couldn't." Silence filled the room. For the first time since I'd met Alexander Blackwood, he didn't look like the untouchable CEO. He looked like a lost boy who had spent his whole life believing a lie. And I was the only person who could give him the truth. The room was thick with silence, heavy with the weight of everything we'd just uncovered. I wanted to reach across the desk, to tell him everything would be okay, but I wasn't sure if I even believed that myself. He sat there, his head bent slightly, his fingers still gripping the edge of the desk. His usual stoic mask had cracked, and now I could see the pain behind it. "I spent my whole life trying to be someone else," he said softly, almost as if talking to himself. "I built this empire, but I don't know why. I don't know who I was doing it for." I took a step forward, my heart breaking for him. "You were doing it for yourself, Alex. You were trying to fill a hole that was never meant to be filled with power or success. It was meant to be filled with family, with love." He looked up at me then, his eyes raw and vulnerable. "And now that I've lost everything, now that I've hurt you, what am I supposed to do?" I could see the desperation in his eyes, the realization that his whole life had been a lie. He had everything, the wealth, the company, the status, but it hadn't been enough. I could feel the tears welling up, but I wiped them away before they could fall. "You start by doing what's right," I said. "You start by making it right with me. With us. This company might have been built on your shoulders, but it can't mean anything if you don't understand the people behind it." He sat there for a long moment staring at me, lost in thought. Finally he stood up. The tall, imposing figure I'd always seen now seemed so much smaller, fragile in his own way. I don't know how to make it right," he said quietly, his voice cracking. "You start by listening," I replied. "You start by understanding that you're not alone anymore. I'm here, Alex, and I won't leave you again." He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and gratitude. "I don't deserve that," he whispered. "You're my brother," I said, my voice firm but gentle, "and that's all that matters." We stood there for a moment, two people who had lost so much, but who had found each other again. The past couldn't be undone. We couldn't erase the years of separation, the pain, the mistakes, but we could choose how we moved forward from this moment. "Can you forgive me?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I nodded, my heart softening. "I already have." He seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, and for the first time, I saw a genuine smile on his face. It wasn't perfect, there was still so much healing left to do, but it was a start. We had a long road ahead of us. But together, we would find our way. After that conversation, things didn't magically fix themselves, but something had shifted between us. There was a fragile sense of hope that hadn't been there before. For the next few days, I stayed away from the office, trying to process everything that had happened. I couldn't just walk back in, pretending things were normal. There were too many emotions, too many questions I needed to sort through. I was also trying to figure out what I wanted, what I needed. The company had been my world for so long, but now it felt like it had been a trap. I'd given up so much, all for a job that tossed me aside the moment it didn't need me anymore. I had no idea what my future looked like, but I knew I couldn't stay stuck in the past. A few days later, I got a call from Alexander. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice sounding more controlled than before. "I want to make this right. I owe you more than an apology." I was quiet for a moment, trying to understand where this was coming from. "What do you mean?" "I've already talked to HR, they're going to reinstate you, and I'll be working alongside you to rebuild the company, together." I almost laughed, though it was more of a shocked, disbelieving sound. "You want me to come back after what happened?" "Yes. Because I realized I can't do this alone. I never could." There was an honesty in his voice that I hadn't heard before. "And I need you, not just for your skills but for your heart. You taught me something I didn't understand before. People matter. Relationships matter." I felt a lump in my throat, but I didn't know how to respond. This wasn't just a professional offer, it was personal. "You don't have to make any decisions right away," he continued. "I'll leave it up to you. But just know that I'm here for you, whatever you need." The call ended, and I sat there, staring at my phone, overwhelmed. I had a lot of decisions to make. I spent the next few days talking to friends, family, anyone who would listen. I even found time to go through some old memories, remembering my mother, the things she used to say about family, about sticking together. It helped me see things more clearly. Then one morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose. The truth was, I didn't just want to get my job back. I wanted to change things. I wanted to build a company that valued its people, not just as assets but as human beings. So I made a decision. I walked into the office, and for the first time in days, I felt the weight of the world lighten just a little. Alexander was waiting for me in his office. He looked different, more relaxed, like he had let go of some of his walls. "Miss Carter," he said with a small smile, standing as I walked in. "I'm glad you came back." I sat down across from him, my hands steady on the desk. "I'm not just coming back to work, Alex," I said firmly. "I'm here to help you rebuild, not just the company. Us." He met my eyes, and I saw something there that I hadn't seen before. Hope. Together, we were going to do things differently. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I had faith in us. We weren't just colleagues anymore. We were family, and this time, we were going to make it right. The days that followed were filled with challenges. Rebuilding wasn't something that happened overnight, and we both had a lot to learn. But it felt different this time. It wasn't about climbing the corporate ladder anymore. It was about making something meaningful, something that wouldn't just fall apart at the first sign of trouble. Alexander and I started meeting daily. At first it was awkward. We were strangers in so many ways. He was the CEO, and I was just the woman who had been fired. But the more we worked together, the more we saw the similarities in our vision. We both believed in the power of human connection, in treating people with dignity and respect. And slowly, we began to make small but significant changes in the company. One of the first things we did was hold a meeting with the entire staff, something that Alexander had never done before. I remember standing beside him, feeling the weight of the moment. I could see the skepticism in everyone's eyes. They had watched me get fired after all. But I wasn't just standing there as a former employee. I was standing there as someone who had been given a second chance. Someone who believed in this company's potential to do better. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter," Alexander said, his voice steady and calm, but with a rawness that came from deep within. "We've made mistakes. I've made mistakes. But we will work together to create an environment where everyone is valued, where no one feels irreplaceable in the wrong way. We're not just a business. We're a family." I could see the surprise on their faces. Maybe they didn't believe it at first. But I did. And I knew Alexander did too. Over the next few weeks, things started to shift. We held open forums where employees could voice concerns, suggest ideas, and be heard. We implemented new policies that focused on collaboration rather than competition, on growth rather than greed. Slowly but surely, the mood in the office started to change. People felt seen, and they started to believe in the future of Blackwood Enterprises again. But it wasn't just the company that was changing, it was us. I saw a side of Alexander that I hadn't noticed before, the caring, thoughtful person behind the suit and tie. He started reaching out to people on a personal level, getting to know them as individuals rather than just employees, and I began to realize how much I had underestimated him. He wasn't the cold, ruthless CEO I had thought he was. He was a man who had buried his past for so long that he had forgotten who he really was. One evening, after a long day of meetings, we sat in his office going over the latest report. There was a comfortable silence between us, the kind that comes when you've started to understand someone deeply. He glanced at me, a slight smile tugging at his lips. "You know," he said quietly, "I never thought I'd get to this point. I thought I was just a businessman, but now I think I understand what matters." I smiled back, feeling the warmth of his words. "It's never too late to learn, Alex." He nodded, looking out the window at the city below. "I have a lot of things to make up for, a lot of people to make amends with, but I'll do it. For us, for this company." I reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "We'll do it together." He met my gaze, and for the first time since we'd reunited, I saw a true sense of peace in his eyes. It was as if the weight of the world had lifted, even if just for a moment. "We will," he agreed, his voice full of resolve. We were no longer just a brother and sister trying to rebuild a lost family. We were partners in a journey to change something bigger than ourselves. And as difficult as the road ahead would be, I knew one thing for certain. We were in it together. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to show some love by hitting that like button. Your support means the world to us and helps bring more stories like this one. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more captivating stories and exciting twists. Share this with friends who love a good surprise, and let's keep the journey going together. Thank you for being a part of our community.